Hey everybody, welcome back to Towers Books Beyond, and today I've got for you the Rainbow Flag book tag. Though book-wise I am mainly focusing on Emoji-a-thon this month, June is also International Pride Month, and so I figured what better time than to do this very prideful tag. This tag I was not actually tagged in, but I did see it like a year ago on my friend RC's channel over at Neko the Book Lock. It's actually part of the reason why I started subscribing to him. And it's a series of 6 questions, each one named after one of the colors in the pride flag, and focusing mainly on queer literature. But here's where things get a bit tricky, or at least they do for me, because since I've started trying to branch out and get more diverse books, well, I've just ended up with a lot of queer books, and normally when I do a book tag, I try to only do one book per question because I don't want to make it so huge. But I was looking at all of my queer books and I realized there wasn't really anything that I wanted to leave out. So what I've ended up doing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this into 2 different videos. I'm going to do the first 3 questions in this one, I'm going to do the second 3 in a different video, because otherwise this would take 8 years to complete. So let's get started. Number 1 is Red, your favorite queer book that features a love story. Now, while a lot of the queer books I've read do feature love stories, I would say that my favorite one of all would be If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo, which is about a trans girl who moves to a new town, starts going to a new school right after she's completed transitioning to female. That way no one has to know that she was assigned male at birth, and no one has to know that she even transitioned at all. They just kind of assume that she's a cis girl. It's really good because the love story I felt was really well handled, especially the ending, which, minor spoilers, but basically by the end of the book, the romance between her and her love interest is not the emotional finale of the book. Like, it goes out of its way and makes it very clear to say that whether she gets together with the guy in the end or not isn't as important as the fact that she now loves herself. And I think that's a really important message for young adults in general, but especially for queer kids, because, well, so often the coming out narrative in fiction, it features a romance, and you know, that's great, and that's nice, and that's really hopeful, but sometimes someone needs to say, you know what, this doesn't always happen in real life. You may not immediately find a boyfriend or girlfriend or other friend as soon as you come out. You might not ever find one, but you know what, that's okay, because you're worthy of love on your own merits. There's also Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Delire Sands, which is it's just such a good love story, guys. It's so cute. It's so sweet. Half the time I was reading it, I was just going... So this one is also totally worth checking out. Now, the second question is Orange, and that's to find a queer book that is filled with creativity. And, you know, it was really hard not to just stick every queer fantasy and sci-fi that I owned in this category, so there were quite a few that I ended up shuffling into different categories, and you know what, I still ended up with 4 books for this. So we'll start with a book that I don't physically have, which is A History of Glitter and Blood by Hannah Moskowitz. This is a book that, it's creative because it's a fantasy, but it's a low fantasy. So you've got stuff like gnomes and fairies and other kinds of fair folk and several fantasy tropes, but it's a low fantasy because it's very gritty, like they're all fighting each other to the death. We've got other stuff like some platonic cannibalism, disembodied sentient eyes and jars, and another reason why it's creative is because every single person in this whole universe is bisexual. Like, everyone dates. Gender is irrelevant when it comes to falling in love and dating people. No one judges anyone on which gender they're attracted to or whether they're falling in love with one gender instead of the other. No, it's just everyone's bi. Just take it as it is, deal with it. It's great. Then we've got Every Heart a Doorway by Shayna Maguire, which is a book that I keep on seeing pop up more and more on BookTube, which is great because I love it. This is a book about all those kids who wind up in fantasy land. So, you know, they go to the fairy lands, or they go to Oz, or they go to Wonderland, and then they have to come back home, and they have to deal with the trauma of being in this place where all their dreams come true, and then being shoved in this place where the real world, frankly, it sucks. Like, no one's gonna argue that. And so they all go to this boarding school that teaches them basically how to deal with the fact that they're stuck in the real world forever, unless they get really lucky and are able to find the doors back to their fantasy worlds again. And of the main characters in this book, there's an asexual girl, and there's also a trans boy. He is really interesting because he was taken by the fairies to be their princess when he was presenting as a girl, and then he got kicked out when they found out that he was actually a trans boy. And so he's stuck in this interesting situation where he hates being stuck in the real world, but he also never wants to go back to his fantasy land because now he's really pissed at them for kicking him out because of something so gross and petty. Then there's Pile of Bones by Bailey Cunningham, which will always hold a soft spot in my heart because it's set in my hometown of Regina, Saskatchewan. Furthermore, all 4 of the main characters in this book are queer, and what's really neat about this one is that it takes place in a Dungeons and Dragons type world, and I don't just mean, oh, vaguely inspired European fantasy. I mean, when they go into this world, they become player characters that have, like, stats, and they can even sometimes roll dice in order to like make really important moves and power themselves up. It doesn't get too deep into that in this book, first book, but it is part of a trilogy, and I'm sure that as things go on, it is going to get more and more in depth of the complexities of that world, and so that's going to be really fun, and this is a really cool book just on its own. And last for the creativity question, see what I mean when I said this is going to take 8 years to complete? We've got Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, which is not actually a fantasy or sci-fi or any kind of speculative fiction. This is an autobiographical graphic novel, or an autobiographic novel, if you will. It talks about the author's childhood and how she grew up with a very stern father. Eventually, she goes off to college and discovers her own sexuality, and then when she comes out to her parents, she eventually is informed that her father is probably a closeted gay man as well, and so it goes back and forth between her childhood and her adulthood, and after her father's death, because her father did actually die shortly after, they started to sort of try and bond with each other over their shared experiences. And I really like this because it really plays with the medium and the art style, because you do have Bechdel's own drawings in it, but you also have like recreations of photos of her family and her father, and you've also got like reproductions of letters that she wrote, or journal entries, and letters from her parents, and like town documents and maps of the surrounding area. So it really plays around with all these elements, and it really helps create this scrapbook story that gives a broad picture of her and her father's whole lives as far as she could make it. So now we can finally move on to question number 3, and the final question for this video, which is Yellow and a queer character who is happy and positive. This is one that I actually had a bit of trouble with, just because at first glance, a lot of the characters in my queer books seem pretty, well, bitter and negative, but eventually I was able to find some examples. First, from Labyrinth Lost, we have Rishi, who is the best friend and eventually love interest of the main character Alex. She is a lesbian girl, and when she gets embroiled in the whole fantasy adventure thing, she pretty much takes it all in stride. She's quite optimistic, and she serves as essentially the emotional core of Alex's journey. She's the one who gives her the hope and the happiness and the confidence to keep going on her quest to save her family. And so she's kind of really an unsung hero when it comes to this book. I'm sure a lot of people focus on Alex's journey, and Alex's journey is pretty awesome, but Rishi, I don't think Alex would have succeeded without Rishi's help. So yeah, Rishi is pretty awesome. Then there's Edda from Not Otherwise Specified, and okay, Edda is kind of a mixed bag, because she tries to be happy and positive, but like I said, she can be quite bitter and snarky, and she goes through a lot of angsty stuff over the course of this book. But I'm putting her in this section because I feel like the end of her emotional character arc was when she was finally able to find joy in doing the things she loved. She was able to draw happiness and confidence out of performing and doing musical theater and all that stuff. She was able to finally come full circle as a character, and I felt it was a really nice way to end her character arc and a really good climax to the book as a whole. So that concludes the first half of my Rainbow Flag book tag. Hopefully it won't be too long until I'm able to get the second half out. And yeah, I'm not gonna tag anyone yet because, well, like I just said, it's only halfway through. You gotta wait until the end before you tag people. So in that case, I guess I'll just see you all later.